Hey, Brett, so I was wondering, is there any such thing as the ultimate leader?
It's good that you start with such an easy question today.
Right? To ease us in.
Is there an ultimate leader? Yeah, well, um, yes, there probably is actually, because there are some leaders who just get it right. And they get it right more than they get it wrong. There's probably a number of caveats to that. So I don't want to oversimplify the ultimate leader, although maybe you've landed on a really good title for your first book, The Ultimate Leader by
Right?
Frank. I think you've landed on it there. But if I look at some of the great leaders I've had the opportunity to work with, some stand out for a couple of critical things that they do. And the one thing they all have in common is you know exactly who they are, what they are, and why they're like that. They're consistent, they're public, they're bold. And perhaps what underpins that ultimate leader is something you and I have been talking about of late, which is they've got a leadership signature.
It sounds really good, but perhaps I think you need to explain a little bit for everybody else what it actually means, because we're not apparently not talking about an actual signature on the piece of paper. So what do we mean by that?
Although it's an interesting concept, because when you're learning, I don't know if you remember back to when you first maybe got a checkbook, I used to practice my signature and it wouldn't always, be the same until it became something. So I think signature, another way of explaining it, perhaps with more visual images, to think of it like a theme tune. So when you think of your favorite movies, if I think of Star Wars or Indiana Jones or Jaws, three of my favorite movie franchise, they have a theme tune. So I don't even need to be in the room. If the television is on and I hear that music, I know what movie is playing.
Right.
And all the way through the film, that music comes up, and not always with exactly the same notes, but it's the theme tune. And my feeling is, and I said with a real smile, is when you walk through a room, virtual or real life, what's your theme tune? Because that's the signature. When you walk through, what do people hear and what do they feel and what do they see? And that's what we leave people with, that signature that stays in the room when we're not there, so that people have this feeling and impression of what kind of leader we are.
Yes,
So it's like a theme tune.
I love that that analogy. This is really good. So I can, or maybe even from the perspective of the observer, if you go into the office, for example, and you see a certain person who you would say is a really great leader, you immediately kind of know what he or she is all about. You know it. They don't need to keep telling you, right? It's just that somehow they carry this, how do you express this even? Some sort of air around them that you know what they are all about. And they can only be like that if they actually know, because I don't think you can fake that.
For sure, if you fake it, you'll be exposed. This has to be congruent, because people know when it's not congruent. If what you say and what you do don't match, I think
comes out. Yeah, always comes out. So you were saying earlier that there are some people who apparently really stand out as great leaders who have, mastered certain things about them. I'm sure there's also a really big amount, a large amount of leaders who aspire to become really, really great leaders, but they don't fall into the same category of what you would say would be the ultimate or the really, really good leaders. So what are they lacking? What's missing for them? Assuming the intention is there to learn.
I think then when you're talking about people who aspire, I think that part of it is a lack of boldness, but I think what underpins it is a lack of clarity in what they're trying to achieve as a leader. And this is where the theme tune, the signature, comes in again, right? Because if you know what your real purpose is, then everything you do, everything you say, all your actions all go back to that same point. This is what I'm here for. There's a great story, Frank, from Walt Disney. And when they created the theme park, the first theme park, and Walt's vision was, to create a park where adults and children could play as one. Walt died a little bit before the theme park opened. And when they opened the park, and the governor was there of California, cutting the pink ribbon, or probably red because it's Mickey Mouse, cutting the red ribbon, he gave this speech where he talked about how it was such a shame that Walt wasn't here to see all of this,
Yeah.
And his nephew, Ralph, who took over the business, he came back to the mic and he said, actually, Governor, I don't think it's a shame that Walt's not here to see this. We're all here because Walt could see this.
Wow, nice. That's deep.
Right? And for me, this resonates a lot when I think of great leaders, because if you're thinking of that theme tune and you're thinking of your signature, what goes along with it is purpose and vision. And so if you're aspiring to be a leader, so you're not talking about sitting as CEO of the company, you're talking about stepping into your first leadership position, maybe. How can you lead your team of 6 people, for example? Even at that level, you need to have your purpose and your vision and know what your signature is. Because the congruence between those 3 is what gives, I think, leadership purpose. And that's what creates the great leader in 20 years' time. Because it's experience. You don't suddenly, like in your first job as a leader, you don't step into, I'm a great leader.
No.
Years.
Most of the time, you're, as most of the time you're promoted into this position because the person who promoted you saw that you were very good at what you're doing as a contributor. Right. They're thinking that if they elevate you, you can actually make everybody as good as you were in that particular job. But and that's often the expectation.
Right.
So and a lot of people understand this. Okay, so that's my mission, but then they're missing out actually on the leadership part, right? At least they're missing out on looking at it and really developing this. But tell me, how can I know that you and I, we've both been doing this, but maybe there are a couple of questions that people begin to ask themselves to even begin to deliberately develop something that could be their theme or their leadership signature. What could those be?
I think the starting point for most of us has to be to really think about, how do I want to make a difference? What's impact am I trying to have in this company? Broader, it could be in the world, but ultimately, what's the impact? What's the difference I want to make?
Yeah, and I have a question to you about this, actually. Don't you have that also, that people confuse this, trying to find an answer to that question once again with what their, how do you say, what their day job area responsibility is. So let's say you've been a freshly promoted manager of a 6-people sales team, and you would have this question in front of you: how do I make a difference? How do I have an impact? A lot of people are thinking, well, I'm just going to drive the numbers, right? So that is, but that's not what you mean, do you?
Well, actually, that's one of the answers, and it's totally appropriate. But I think with this question, you might have 8 or 9 answers. Actually, for me, the point of purpose is there isn't one answer. We could look at other questions as well that you can consider. I think this task of potential leaders aiming to become a leader, when they think about what they want to have an impact, what they want to be, you know, what difference they want to make, I think they need to write down as many answers as possible and then look to see what the themes are. Because making the number might be the first thing they think of. And then the next thing that comes to my mind would be to develop and grow future managers in the team. There's a second thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's good, because this is that's not, you know, completely just focused on the actual deliverable, but it starts to be focused on people, which in turn is actually challenging your leadership skills.
Right. And then a third thing comes, actually, I want to develop those individuals. And I want to build the team. I want to grow the team. And suddenly I've got 5 answers now.
Yeah.
And some are task related, some are individual related, and some are team related. And when I capture all of the answers, I can look at these answers and think, okay, so can I somehow simplify all of these answers into a theme? What's this telling me about the kind of leader I want to be? And it might be, Frank, that, you know, some people, they write 9 answers and 7 of them are about the number and 2 of them relate to the people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Other, you know, the other people, it's the other way around. 7 relate to the people and 2 relate to the number.
Yeah, but I think the key thing is you have to probably ask yourself very, very honestly, if, you know, what you write down, is that really what you want to stand for?
Correct.
Right. So I think doing some sanity check on that is makes a lot of sense, because isn't, you know, one of the other questions that you would ask yourself is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I love that. I mean, talk about instantly creating real legacy.
Yeah.
When you think of that question, you've posed it there. What do you want to be remembered for? Like, when you consider it, when you were in management and leadership positions in a corporate rather than leading your own kind of business, what did you used to think? If someone had said that to you?
Yeah. I can tell you that. Let me tell you the truth about this. The truth about this is I never asked myself this question. So in the sense of that, I've never tried to put it into words, into a sentence that I can look at and use that as a guideline, you know, sometimes when, I don't know, things that happen derail you a little bit or challenge you or something like that, and you can go back to that and say, I need to get back to on track with what is it that I actually want to be remembered for, as for example, and there are other things also. And I must honestly tell you that I think I would always have a feeling, a little bit of an inner compass about that. So I think I was fine with that. But if I would have to do it again and get back in time, I would want to actually answer that question and write it down and revisit it from time to time and so on. So I think this would have been super helpful.
It's, for me, actually, when, you know, we have the opportunity on a regular basis to engage with clients and customers on workshops and interventions. And I think it's a really powerful question to consider, even when you're not necessarily managing huge teams, just when you want to operate as a leader. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want people to say when you're not there? So if today's our last day, Frank, and you and I are leaving, tomorrow, when we don't come into the office, what are people going to say? Oh gosh, Frank and Brad, do you know what? I'm really going to miss ...
Right.
And if you can, and this for me is why leadership is so much about envisioning, like Walt Disney, right? You see the end first, and then you breathe life into it. So if I know what I want people to say, then every action I take leading up to me leaving can help drive that image of what people will remember.
Yes, and in addition, you know, look, if when times get tough, it's so easy to no longer focus on this. But I think if you have that spelled out for yourself, you can actually get back to it. I think you can derive energy for getting through harder times by being very, very clear about why you're here, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it links to this idea of the impact of your contribution, the scope of your impact.
yeah,
What do you want that scope to be? Maybe it links to a third question then. So we know how we want to make a difference. We know how we want to be remembered. But what about acknowledging what I do already that is really good and people appreciate? Like, create some self-awareness around what people value in how I operate.
yeah. That's it. That is so important. And you know what's funny? I don't think that. Of course, you can try to answer this question yourself, but you're making an assumption that people are appreciating this and that you're actually really good at that.
For sure.
So, what would be so smart and at the same time probably so hard for the ego to do is, I think we mentioned it before in one of the other episodes, to write an email to your colleagues and peers and so on. Hey, tell me the first 3 things that come to your mind when you think about it. And then see if that is in anywhere in line with what you thought about yourself. Hopefully it is for the most part, but I'm sure there are going to be some surprises.
I think, I can't remember if I shared with you, but we were on a team leader workshop a month or so ago where I suggested this idea of checking. Meanwhile, while we were doing the session, one of the delegates already did it, and he sent the email out to his people. And then by the end of the day, he shared on screen what everyone had sent back to him. And it was great because it showed real courage from his part. And actually what people said was completely different to how he wanted to be. Both sides were positive, but it meant that the way he was acting and the way he was showing up wasn't linked to how he wanted to be known as a leader.
Yes.
And so I think to get that feedback is critical.
And I remember that actually from a personal perspective also. I remember when one of those 360 feedback exercises that I have done for myself, asking others about how they see me and so on. There were a few things that really surprised me. I really thought I'd be good at this and people would perceive it at that, but that wasn't the case. Now, that can feel a little bit frustrating, but it can also mean that maybe you are good at something like that, but you're not showing it, you're not demonstrating it to people for them to see and agree with you on this. So it's not necessarily always frustrating, but it's very, very eye-opening.
Yeah, and to that point, most of the time we're so busy being busy, we don't ask these questions.
Yeah.
How many people genuinely go to work and while they're sitting there in days when we used to travel to an office, and on the way to the office, they're thinking about, how am I going to come across today?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I know I do, most of the time, because, sometimes I think a little bit tactical about what do I need to achieve today, and with the people that I'm going to be with, how do I actually achieve this? And it's not, not saying, I need this graphic versus another graphic. It's about, myself. So how do I, how do I need to be in this moment with the people that are there in order to achieve a result that I want? And in a leadership environment, of course, you can ask yourself the same question all the time. When you think about your, leadership signature, your theme on, what do you want to be remembered for and so on, keep that back as a guideline, because depending on who you work with or are going to interact with you next, perhaps you need to emphasize a certain characteristic or personality trait of yours a little bit more than on other occasions with another group. So being deliberate about that, I think it's also super important.
And I think I think we can build on that as well, because unless you're consistent and public, what happens is you never sort of spread your visibility. And I think as a leader, one of the greatest challenges for leaders in the business world today is how do I become visible as a leader? And so this stuff, what we're talking about here, for me is really critical. Because if you're going to start spreading yourself out and be more public, a bit more bold, then that consistency becomes important, because you may well be recognized amongst your team members. You may even be recognized amongst your peers. But when you look at your own manager and then their peers, or skip level up a couple, are you visible to them? How do you show up 2 levels above you?
Yeah, it can be uncomfortable. They can be, it can feel quite uncomfortable because, you know, unless you have, you know, an absolutely amazing self-confidence, depending on the group you're with, maybe that's a little bit harder than with, you know, let's say your comfort zone people that you've already established a certain theme with, but doing that with another group, and so on, it can feel a little bit scary.
And I think it goes to another level, Frank, because we live in a world of social media today. So if you're going to be posting on LinkedIn or on Twitter, is what you say on there, does it look the same as if I meet you in person or have a meeting with you? So these questions that we're talking about here, these 3 questions, I think help create a consistency, and none of them have just one answer.
Yeah, I was just
there'll be themes, but not one answer.
The consistency is the fundament for authenticity here, isn't it? So if you portray a very different picture in the way you communicate, maybe even publicly, than you actually ever will be, that creates a problem for you. An authenticity problem. And authenticity, you know, if you're not authentic, I have the impression that other people will have a really hard time trusting you, because they don't know what to expect. You're out of the theme that you were trying to create. Let me add one more thing, Brad. I think that people who have developed a strong leadership signature are very aware of their blind spots. They know also what they're not great at yet. And they either begin to develop in those areas, or they are so smart, which is completely valid, to surround themselves with people who complement their skills. And ideally, of course, they are even much, much better than you as a leader at it.
I watched a great video of Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager.
I know you love him.
Life according to Jurgen.
Yeah.
The Klopp philosophy. And although I'm not a Liverpool fan, I admire his style and approach, his enthusiasm, his leadership signature, right? And there's one moment in this interview where he talks about he doesn't need to know everything. All he needs is the confidence, the real confidence, to let other people grow next to him. Surround himself not just with good people, he said. He surrounds himself with experts. And that gives him the confidence to let them get on with it.
Yeah.
And I love that concept. Yeah, to be so confident in your experts that you don't need to. Now, you might know something about it. And you might be one of those people that knows something about a lot of things. But let the experts be the experts. And then I think, you know, when you talk about that great leader, the ultimate leader at the beginning of this conversation, I think ultimate leaders are not insecure. They're so secure, they're so confident that they can let other people shine next to them. But in fact, they want to shine a light on other people. So when things are successful, it's the team. And when things go wrong, it's me.
Yeah,
they know just when to shine a light.
And you know what's interesting about that also? They are so confident that they are also in peace and with their weak spots and blind spots. Not meaning that they don't want to work on this, but you have to be actually confident. You have to be a bit courageous to admit to yourself that perhaps you're not the greatest, I don't know, operational talent. or something like that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Again, going back to your question, right at the beginning of Ultimate Leaders, the best leaders I've observed are able to stand up and share what they're great at without sounding like some show off, and can stand up and share what they are absolutely terrible at without somehow coming across as vulnerable, exposed, and weak. There's this perfect balance between, look, this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm not so good at. So give me a minute, I can think about that, and I may come up with an idea, but maybe you're better off talking to Frank because he's the expert.
Yeah, the greatest leaders I've seen have always let the experts run point on where it's not their greatest strength. That's a common theme, by the way.
I think so. And actually, when you look at the leaders, conversely, who are not so embracing of that approach, they tend to want to run it all. They want to control, they want to micromanage, they want to know everything. And I think those leaders show up poorly.
Right.
And people see it very quickly.
Yeah, that's right. How can I know that I already know the answer to my question, but it's not so much for me, but I know that you two also have helped whole leadership teams be more deliberate about developing their leadership signature. Do you, because you've been doing this a couple of times now, how successful is this actually? How do you think people can actually be helped making significant steps on that actually very personal journey?
I think 100% I believe it to be true. And my qualification for that isn't just what I've observed in working with leaders one-on-one or in groups. It's the synergistic impact of taking a group of leaders to work on their leadership signature, how that then helps the team execute against its own demands as a team. Because that collective intelligence, that collective leadership, suddenly when you've got 6 leaders in a team, all completely clear on their purpose, you suddenly find a natural alignment to a team leadership purpose, and those teams I've seen be more productive, effective, efficient, successful, whatever adjective you want to use.
Yeah, that's the power of clarity.
Fundamentally believe it.
Yeah.
But it's hard. It's not something that you do in an afternoon. Frank, I would suggest to anyone listening to this that they get a load of Post-it notes, sticky notes, and they put them on the table in front of them. And they take our 3 or 4 questions that we're playing with today, and they put the questions on the table. And then they start to write answers. And for every answer, they write a different answer on a different Post-it note. And they don't try and get to the end of like, okay, I've got 9 answers to what do I want to be remembered for. Don't look at it yet. Just put the 9 underneath that question. Go to the next question. And when you've finished all the questions and you've got like 50 Post-it notes on the table, stand back and just scan them. And I would guarantee, I would bet my mortgage, this is how confident I am, right? I would bet, I might be homeless soon. I would bet my mortgage that when you stand back and you look at this table full of Post-it notes, the themes will start coming out at you. And you'll be able to take all of those answers to those questions, and maybe there's 2 or 3 themes that they relate to. So you remove them all and you put them into the themes. Then you stand back again. And maybe you leave it on your desk for a few days. You just let it, ruminate, think about it. What do those themes mean? Are they authentic? Am I congruent? You play with it. Maybe you check with some other people. Hey, I'm thinking this. Is it what you see? And then you go back, and I believe the last stage of this theme tune signature is you look at all those answers, you look at the themes, and when you look at the themes, the themes give you this statement of what kind of leader you are. And then you have your signature. And
like,
go on.
Yeah, like your tagline.
Right. And it literally is what's your hashtag.
Yeah.
Imagine if Frank was giving a talk later today in Bucharest at the university, there's this huge poster with you on it, and then underneath is this little tagline, and that's what we're looking for, that tagline that follows you around. That's the theme tune there.
That's what we encourage everyone with this talk to begin to find, to start on that journey.
And I think what you get then, Frank, is you get to answer the question, the impact that you have based on the contribution you make.
Yeah.
And actually, I know we've been talking about this from a leadership point of view, but I think for anybody who's listening to this, maybe who's looking to go for an interview, maybe during, the pandemic, they've lost their job. And they're a little bit nervous now because they're going for interviews. Actually, for me, this kind of clarity is what people recruiting are looking for as well. So when they say to you, so, what are you looking to achieve? Actually, you've got your impact statement.
Yeah, this is going to be super powerful in hiring. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think it's multi-purpose then. And if this can inspire people just a little bit to start thinking about, well, do you know what? This is the impact. And here's another question. I don't know what you think about this one. To consider what you want to hear other people say about you. I always imagine, I loved watching and reading the Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling. And I say that, I actually only read the first 2 books and then the movies came out. So it was just easier to spend 2.5 hours watching the movie than reading the whole book. But Harry had an invisible cloak, right? So he could put the cloak on and he could go anywhere and listen into conversations. Imagine that you had that cloak and you find the CEO and the president and the CTO and the CFO walking down the corridor and you hear your name. So you put on your invisible cloak and you follow them. What do you want to hear them say?
Yeah, that is a very nice question to ask yourself. And maybe, one other thing about this. So imagine you actually really had that cloak and you could now go to, this other group. And if you ask, if this, imagination makes you feel uncomfortable, then I think you got work to do.
Right. Yeah, there's learning even in the process. It's not just about the destination, the process, the journey bit, you can find the learning.
That's a really good indicator. If you're secretly afraid to hear what other people are talking about you, then I think you actually have not yet deliberately started to develop your leadership signature. I don't think so.
Because Frank, what it suggests from a psychological perspective is that you are overly self-conscious rather than overtly self-aware. And it's a subtle difference.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. As you can see, I love this topic.
Yes, I know. But I think we have to wrap up because we're probably, again, 35 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, well, you know what? We got that feedback, didn't we, about doing 2-minute ones and 5-minute ones, but I just don't know how we do that with any depth. Maybe we should try it next time. We'll try a 5-minute pod next time, and we'll have an alarm go off and stop, and then at least people will be able to see what we can do in 5.
We can try.
Frank, that was generous and good fun. I enjoyed that. See you next time.
Likewise. Take care, Brad.